To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Dwayne Reese had built his life on 3 pillars: honor, family, and service. At 34, the Army Staff Sergeant carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen combat in 2 tours overseas and lived to tell about it. His broad shoulders and calloused hands spoke of years spent maintaining discipline both in himself and others. But it was his eyes, sharp green and perpetually alert, that revealed the tactical mind beneath. The small town of Millbrook, Texas, had been home for the past 3 years, ever since his transfer to Fort Carson's satellite training facility. It was here he'd thought he'd found peace with his wife Bonnie and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. The modest 2-story house on Maple Street represented everything he'd fought for: stability, normalcy, a future worth protecting. Bonnie Reese had been the homecoming queen type, blonde, vivacious, with a smile that could light up any room. They'd met during his leave 7 years ago, married quickly in the whirlwind romance that often accompanies military life. Emma had come along a year later, inheriting her father's sharp intelligence and her mother's striking blue eyes. But lately, something had shifted in their household's rhythm. Bonnie had grown distant, spending more evenings out with friends and less time engaged with Emma's school activities. She'd started dressing differently, buying clothes that seemed more appropriate for a single woman than a military wife and mother. Her phone had become permanently attached to her hand, protected by sudden privacy concerns that hadn't existed before. Dwayne had noticed. A soldier notices everything, but he'd chosen to trust rather than investigate. Trust was the foundation of any marriage, especially one strained by the demands of military service. He'd survived 2 deployments by focusing on what mattered most: getting home to his girls. He wouldn't let paranoia destroy what he'd fought to protect. Emma was his anchor, his reminder of what pure goodness looked like in the world. She excelled in school, played soccer with fierce determination, and had inherited his love of strategy through their weekly chess matches. Every evening when he returned from the base, she'd run to greet him with stories of her day, her homework clutched in small hands eager to share her achievements. That Tuesday evening in October had started like any other. Dwayne returned from a particularly grueling training exercise involving new recruits who seemed to think military service was a video game. He'd spent 12 hours drilling proper weapons handling and tactical movement into kids barely out of high school, his patience tested by their casual attitude toward life and death skills. "Daddy," Emma's voice carried across the driveway as he pulled up in his pickup truck. She bounded toward him wearing her soccer uniform, grass stains marking another afternoon of determined play. "How's my champion?" He scooped her up, spinning her around as she giggled. "Score any goals today?" "2. And I made a save when Katie tried to steal the ball." Her pride was infectious, and for a moment, the day's frustrations melted away. "That's my girl. Where's your mom?" Emma's expression shifted slightly, a shadow crossing her young features. "She went out again. Mrs. Peterson from next door is watching me until you got home." The neighbor, a kind widow in her 60s, waved from the front porch. Dwayne set Emma down and walked over to thank her, but something nagged at him. This was the 4th time this month Bonnie had been absent when he returned from work. "Everything all right?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her weathered face creased with concern. Bonnie seemed upset when she left. Said she'd be back late. "I'm sure it's nothing," Dwayne replied, though his instincts suggested otherwise. "Thank you for looking after Emma." That evening, as he helped Emma with her math homework and listened to her chatter about school friends and weekend plans, Dwayne's mind wandered to the growing list of small inconsistencies in his marriage. Bonnie's new gym membership that required evening workouts. Her sudden interest in country music, a genre she'd previously dismissed. The way she'd started taking phone calls in the garage or bathroom, always with whispered conversations that ended abruptly when he appeared. He'd been trained to recognize patterns, to identify threats before they materialized. But this was his marriage, his family, the one place where his guard was supposed to be down. The one place where trust wasn't a tactical decision, but a choice born of love. By the time Bonnie returned home at nearly midnight, Emma was asleep and Dwayne was reviewing duty rosters in his study. She slipped in quietly, her explanation of dinner with the girls running late, delivered with the kind of casual deflection that set off every alarm bell in his combat-trained mind. He chose silence over confrontation, trust over suspicion. It was a decision that would haunt him within 24 hours. Chapter 2. The Shattering. Wednesday afternoon brought unseasonably warm weather to Millbrook, the kind of day that made Emma insist on riding her bike to soccer practice instead of accepting a ride. She'd been working on her independence lately, asking for more freedom to explore the neighborhood and visit friends without constant supervision. At 8, she was old enough for short trips within their safe suburban enclave. Dwayne had been in the middle of a leadership meeting when his phone buzzed with a text from Bonnie, running errands. Emma at practice until 5. Can you pick her up? It was 4:30 when his phone exploded with calls. The first came from Coach Martinez, Emma's soccer coach, his voice tight with panic. Sergeant Reese, you need to get to Millbrook General immediately. Emma's been hurt. The second call came before he could respond to the first. Mrs. Peterson, sobbing into the phone. Dwayne, I saw the ambulance. They took Emma away. There was so much blood. The drive to the hospital became a blur of red lights and screaming sirens as Dwayne followed the ambulance route in his pickup truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel with enough force to leave marks. Every worst-case scenario, his military training had prepared him for paled compared to the terror of his daughter being hurt. Millbrook General's emergency room was a maze of antiseptic white walls and urgent voices. Dwayne burst through the automatic doors, still wearing his combat uniform, his rank and bearing cutting through the typical hospital bureaucracy like a knife through paper. Emma Reese. He barked at the registration desk. 8 years old, brought in by ambulance. The nurse's face softened with recognition and sympathy. Sergeant Reese? Dr. Kim will be right with you. Your daughter is in surgery. Surgery? The word hit him like shrapnel, tearing through his composure. He'd faced enemy fire without flinching, but the thought of his little girl on an operating table reduced him to a father's desperate prayers. Dr. Kim emerged an hour later, surgical scrubs marked with evidence of his work. Sergeant Reese? Emma's stable. She suffered severe trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding, extensive bruising. She's going to be okay, but she's going to need time to heal. What happened? Was it a car accident? A fall? The doctor's expression darkened. This wasn't an accident, Sergeant. The injuries are consistent with an assault. Someone did this to your daughter deliberately. The emergency room around Dwayne seemed to shift and blur as the implications registered. Someone had hurt Emma. Someone had put their hands on his 8-year-old daughter with intent to cause harm. The protective fury that rose in his chest was unlike anything he'd experienced, even in combat. Where's my wife? He asked, realizing Bonnie was nowhere to be seen. We've been trying to reach her. Do you have an alternate number? Dwayne tried Bonnie's cell phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. Her friends claimed they hadn't seen her. Even her sister, Lori Metcalf, who lived 2 towns over, had no idea where Bonnie might be. It was nearly 8 p.m. when Bonnie finally appeared in the emergency room, her hair disheveled and her makeup smudged. She rushed toward Emma's room with theatrical panic, but Dwayne noticed the smell immediately. Cigarettes and cheap cologne that definitely wasn't his. Where were you? His voice carried the command authority that made subordinates snap to attention. I had errands. I came as soon as I got your messages. But her eyes wouldn't meet his, and her explanation felt rehearsed. Emma was attacked 4 hours ago. Where exactly were you for 4 hours, Bonnie? The confrontation that followed shattered more than just his marriage. Bonnie's defensive anger, her accusations that he was being controlling and paranoid, her refusal to provide a coherent timeline of her afternoon. It all pointed to a truth he'd been refusing to see. When Emma finally woke up, groggy from anesthesia but alive, her first words weren't about the pain or the hospital. They were about the man who'd hurt her. He said I was a snitch, she whispered, her small voice breaking Dwayne's heart. He said kids who tattled on grown-ups deserved to learn lessons. Who, sweetheart? Who said that? Mommy's friend. The one who smells like beer and has the scary tattoos. Dwayne's blood turned to ice. Bonnie had gone pale beside the hospital bed, her guilty expression confirming what her words couldn't deny. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Bonnie was having an affair. Emma had somehow discovered or interrupted something she shouldn't have seen. And rather than face exposure, Bonnie's boyfriend had decided to silence an 8-year-old child with violence. The rage that consumed Dwayne in that moment transcended anything he'd felt in 2 tours of combat. This wasn't about protecting his country or following orders. This was about his daughter, his family, and the sacred trust that had been shattered by people who were supposed to love and protect her. As night fell outside the hospital windows, Dwayne Reese made a decision that would define everything that followed. Some lines, once crossed, demanded a response that went beyond law enforcement and legal remedies. Some violations required a more personal form of justice. Chapter 3. The Promise. The hospital corridors at midnight carried a different energy than during the day. Quieter, more intense, with the kind of focused urgency that came when life and death decisions couldn't wait for morning. Dwayne had been pacing those halls for hours, his mind cycling between Emma's condition and the growing certainty that his marriage was built on lies. Bonnie had left around 10 p.m., claiming she needed to get some things from the house. She'd avoided eye contact and refused to discuss Emma's mention of her friend. Her departure felt like an admission of guilt wrapped in the pretense of concern. It was just past midnight when Nurse Janice Law approached him in the family waiting area. She was a veteran of the emergency room, probably in her 50s, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that came from seeing too much human suffering to waste time on pleasantries. Sergeant Reese. Her voice was professional, but carried an undercurrent of something personal. Could I speak with you privately? They walked to a small consultation room, where she closed the door behind them. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across her weathered face as she studied him with careful eyes. I've been an ER nurse for 23 years, she began. I've seen what adults can do to children, and I've learned to recognize when the system fails those children. Your daughter is stable after 3 surgeries, but you need to know what happened to her wasn't random violence. Dwayne's jaw tightened. The doctor said it was an assault. It was punishment, Janice corrected. Methodical, calculated punishment. Whoever did this knew exactly how much damage to inflict without causing permanent injury. They wanted her to suffer, but they also wanted her to survive and remember. The clinical assessment hit Dwayne like a physical blow. Someone had tortured his 8-year-old daughter with surgical precision, turning violence into a lesson designed to terrorize a child into silence. Janice leaned forward, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something off the record. The police were here earlier, but they refused to file a complaint. They said without more evidence, and given Emma's age, it would be difficult to prosecute. What? Dwayne's voice carried the sharp edge of command authority. A child was assaulted. How is that not worth investigating? Because the man who did this? He's Rod Manning. He's connected in this town. His uncle is Police Chief Tim Lewis, and his cousin runs the district attorney's office. The Manning family has been untouchable in Millbrook for 3 generations. The name hit Dwayne's memory like a lightning strike. Rod Manning. He'd heard Bonnie mention someone named Rod in phone conversations she'd thought were private. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just falling into place. They were forming a picture of systematic corruption and abuse of power. Janice reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Rod Manning thinks he's above consequences. He's hurt other children before. I've treated them, but nothing ever sticks. The complaints disappear, the families get pressured to drop charges, and he walks free every time. She handed him the paper with an address written in careful handwriting. He's waiting outside Murphy's bar on Route 9. He was bragging to anyone who'd listen about teaching some army brat a lesson about respect. He thinks this is funny, Sergeant. He thinks hurting your daughter is a joke he can share with his drinking buddies. Dwayne stared at the address, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. Rod Manning had made this personal by attacking Emma, but he'd made it strategic by hiding behind family connections and corrupt officials. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about removing a threat that the legal system was incapable of handling. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Janice's expression hardened with the kind of anger that comes from watching injustice triumph repeatedly. "Because I have a granddaughter Emma's age. Because I've seen too many children suffer while their attackers walk free. And because you're the kind of man who won't let this stand." She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Rod Manning has been untouchable his whole life. Maybe it's time someone reminded him that everyone bleeds the same. After she left, Dwayne sat alone in the consultation room, staring at the address and processing the information. Rod Manning wasn't just his wife's boyfriend. He was a predator protected by family connections and systematic corruption. He'd hurt Emma to protect his secret relationship with Bonnie, confident that his uncle's badge and his cousin's office would shield him from consequences. But Rod Manning had never faced someone like Dwayne Reese. At 0100 hours, Dwayne returned to Emma's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her small form dwarfed by the hospital machinery monitoring her recovery. The bruises on her face were darkening, and the bandages covering her torso served as evidence of the brutality she'd endured. He knelt beside her bed and took her small hand in his calloused fingers. "I'm going to fix this, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's going to make sure no one ever hurts you again." As he stood to leave, Dwayne's reflection in the dark window showed a man transformed. The loving father and dedicated soldier remained, but underneath was something harder, more dangerous, a predator awakened by the violation of everything he held sacred. The drive home took him past Murphy's bar, where he could see Rod Manning's distinctive black pickup truck parked under the neon beer signs. Inside, a man was celebrating the torture of an 8-year-old girl, confident in his immunity from justice. Dwayne drove past without stopping, but his mind was already working. Rod Manning thought he was untouchable because he'd never faced a real enemy. He'd never encountered someone trained to hunt human beings in environments where rules didn't apply and survival depended on superior planning and ruthless execution. That was about to change. As he pulled into his driveway, Dwayne Reese made a promise that transcended law, morality, and consequence. Rod Manning had declared war on his family by hurting Emma. Now he would learn what happened when someone with his background decided to fight back. The man who'd celebrated torturing a child wouldn't see another sunrise. That wasn't a threat or an emotional outburst. It was a tactical assessment and a promise from a father who'd finally found an enemy worthy of everything he'd learned in 2 tours of combat. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Study. Dawn broke gray and cold across Millbrook as Dwayne returned to the hospital, having spent the remainder of the night in what he'd come to think of as reconnaissance mode. Emma was awake when he arrived, her small face lighting up despite the pain medication that kept her movements slow and careful. "Daddy, when can I go home?" she asked, her voice still carrying the innocence that made Rod Manning's actions even more unforgivable. "Soon, sweetheart. The doctors want to make sure you're completely better first." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, careful to avoid the bruised areas. "Are you hurting?" "Not too much, but I had scary dreams." Dwayne's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "Want to tell me about them?" Emma's description of her nightmares, confused images of being cornered, of adult voices threatening her, of pain that seemed to go on forever, painted a picture of trauma that would require years to heal. Rod Manning hadn't just hurt her body. He'd invaded her sense of safety in a way that would affect her for life. Dr. Kim arrived for morning rounds with encouraging news. Emma's internal injuries were healing well, and she could be released in another day or 2. But he also recommended counseling to help her process the psychological trauma of her assault. "Children are resilient," Dr. Kim explained privately to Dwayne, "but they need help understanding that what happened wasn't their fault and that they're safe now." Safe. The word carried a bitter irony. Emma wouldn't be truly safe as long as Rod Manning was free to hurt other children, protected by family connections and a corrupt system that valued political relationships over justice. After ensuring Emma was comfortable, Dwayne left the hospital with a purpose that went beyond visiting his daughter. He had work to do, the kind of methodical intelligence gathering that had kept him alive in hostile territory. His first stop was the Millbrook Public Library, where he could use their computers without leaving a digital trail connected to his personal devices. The elderly librarian, Morgan Porter, recognized him from Emma's frequent visits and offered sympathetic words about her condition. "Such a sweet girl," Morgan said sadly. "I hope they catch whoever did this to her." "They will," Dwayne replied with quiet certainty. The research took 3 hours, but it painted a comprehensive picture of Rod Manning's life and connections. At 28, he was the youngest of 4 Manning brothers, all of whom had benefited from their family's political influence in Millbrook. His employment history showed a pattern of short-term jobs: mechanic, security guard, construction worker, always ending when his temper got him into trouble. More disturbing were the newspaper archives that revealed a pattern of complaints against Rod Manning dating back 8 years. Domestic violence calls, bar fights, accusations of intimidation and harassment, all of which had mysteriously disappeared from official records or resulted in reduced charges that kept him out of jail. The most damning information came from social media profiles that Rod had failed to properly secure. Photos showing him at parties with underage girls, posts bragging about his immunity from law enforcement, and comments revealing a casual attitude toward violence that painted him as exactly what Dwayne suspected: a predator who'd never faced real consequences. But the research also revealed vulnerabilities. Rod Manning's confidence came from operating in his hometown bubble, protected by family connections. He'd never served in the military, never been tested against someone with serious training, and never encountered an enemy who fought by different rules. His current residence was a trailer on 15 acres outside town, isolated, with only one access road and far enough from neighbors that sounds wouldn't carry. The property had been in a Manning family for decades, used primarily for hunting and what the social media posts euphemistically called private parties. Dwayne's second stop was a gun store on the outskirts of town where he could purchase what he needed without raising questions. His military ID and spotless background check made the process routine, though he was careful to select items that couldn't be easily traced back to him. The third stop was a farm supply store where he picked up materials that would have innocent explanations if anyone asked questions. Rope, plastic tarps, cleaning supplies, and various tools, all items that a military man might reasonably need for property maintenance. By afternoon, Dwayne had assembled a comprehensive intelligence package on Rod Manning and began formulating an operational plan. This wouldn't be a crime of passion or a simple act of revenge. It would be a carefully planned military operation designed to remove a threat that the legal system couldn't handle. His phone buzzed with a text from Bonnie. "Need to talk. Coming to hospital at 6. The message crystallized something that had been building in Dwayne's mind since the previous night. Bonnie wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was Rod Manning's accomplice. She provided him with access to Emma, either directly or through her negligence. Her guilt in this went beyond adultery. It extended to child endangerment and conspiracy. That evening, their confrontation in the hospital parking lot confirmed everything Dwayne suspected. Bonnie arrived wearing clothes that were too expensive for their family budget. Her hair professionally styled in a way that suggested she'd been preparing to look good for someone else. "We need to discuss what happens next," she began, but her tone carried manipulation rather than concern. "Emma was tortured by your boyfriend," Dwayne replied flatly. "What exactly is there to discuss?" Bonnie's face cycled through expressions: surprise that he knew about Rod, fear of consequences, and finally a defensive anger that revealed her true priorities. "It's not that simple, Dwayne. Rod never meant for things to go that far. Emma caught us together and threatened to tell you. He just wanted to scare her into keeping quiet." The casual way she described her daughter's assault as a reasonable response to being discovered in adultery told Dwayne everything he needed to know about the woman he'd married. This wasn't the mother who'd once sung lullabies to Emma or celebrated her achievements with genuine pride. This was someone who'd chosen her own selfish desires over her child's safety. "Pack your things and get out," he said with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to giving orders that weren't questioned. "Take what you can carry and don't come back. You can't just throw me out. I have rights. This is my house too. Your rights ended when you endangered our daughter for an affair with a predator. Leave now, or I'll make sure the entire town knows exactly what kind of mother you are." Bonnie's threats about lawyers and custody battles revealed her complete misunderstanding of the situation. She still thought this was a normal domestic dispute that would be resolved through normal channels. She didn't realize that her husband had already moved beyond the realm of divorce courts and legal remedies. After she left, Dwayne returned to Emma's room, where his daughter was watching a movie on the small television. She looked up at him with trust and love that made his heart ache, but also with a fragility that hadn't existed before Rod Manning's assault. "Is Mommy coming back?" she asked with the insight that children often possess about adult conflicts. "No, sweetheart. Mommy made some bad choices, and now it's just going to be you and me for a while." Emma nodded with an acceptance that suggested she'd already sensed the fundamental change in their family dynamic. "Will the bad man come back?" Dwayne knelt beside her bed and took her hand, looking directly into her eyes as he made the most important promise of his life. "No, Emma. The bad man will never hurt you again. Daddy is going to make sure of that." It was a promise that would require him to cross lines he'd never crossed before, to use skills he'd hoped never to use again, and to become someone his daughter would never fully understand. But it was also a promise he intended to keep, regardless of the cost. Rod Manning had made a fatal error in judgment. He'd hurt Dwayne's daughter while assuming that small-town corruption and family connections would protect him from consequences. He'd never considered that he might face an enemy trained to hunt predators in environments where the only law was survival. That oversight would prove to be the last mistake Rod Manning ever made. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. The next morning brought unseasonably cold weather to Millbrook, the kind of sharp October air that reminded Dwayne of patrol mornings in Afghanistan, when clarity came with the dawn and every decision carried life or death consequences. Emma was being discharged from the hospital, and Dr. Kim had provided a comprehensive recovery plan that would keep her close to home for the next several weeks. "She's going to need time," the doctor explained as they reviewed Emma's discharge papers. "The physical healing is progressing well, but children who've experienced this kind of trauma often struggle with trust and anxiety. Consistent routine and a sense of safety will be crucial." Safety. There was that word again, carrying weight that Dr. Kim couldn't fully understand. Emma wouldn't truly be safe until the threat was permanently eliminated, and Dwayne had spent the night developing a plan that would accomplish exactly that. His first call was to his commanding officer, Colonel Charlie Lucas, requesting emergency family leave. The colonel, a veteran of 3 combat deployments himself, understood without requiring extensive explanation. "Take what you need, Reese. Family comes first, especially when it comes to protecting our children." The second call was to his old squad leader from his second deployment, Staff Sergeant Keith Ogden, now stationed at Fort Hood, but with connections throughout the veteran community in Texas. "I need a favor," Dwayne explained carefully, knowing that Keith would understand the subtext of their conversation. "Someone hurt Emma. The local system isn't equipped to handle the problem." Keith's response was immediate and unwavering. "What do you need?" "Information, equipment, and someone I can trust to handle communications if this gets complicated." Within hours, Keith had provided a secure communication setup and connected Dwayne with Raphael Grady, a former military intelligence specialist who now operated a private security consulting firm. Raphael's specialty was gathering information on individuals who operated outside normal legal boundaries. "Rod Manning," Raphael said when Dwayne provided the name. "Give me 12 hours, and I'll have everything you need to know about this piece of trash." While waiting for Raphael's intelligence report, Dwayne focused on establishing new routines with Emma. They spent the afternoon setting up a temporary bedroom for her on the first floor of their house, avoiding the stairs that might strain her healing ribs. Emma helped choose new books and games, her excitement at the special arrangements almost masking the subtle signs of trauma that would take months to fully address. But it was during their chess game that evening, a tradition they'd maintained since Emma was 5, that she provided the most crucial piece of intelligence. "Daddy," she said while considering her next move, "the bad man. He wasn't alone when he hurt me." Dwayne kept his expression neutral despite the surge of protective fury. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "There was another man there. He had a camera. He kept telling the bad man to make sure she learned her lesson, and saying they needed to send a message. The implications hit Dwayne like shrapnel. Rod Manning hadn't acted alone. He'd had an accomplice, and they'd documented Emma's assault. This wasn't just about silencing a child who'd witnessed an affair. It was about something larger and more sinister. Can you describe the other man? Emma's description was detailed enough to paint a clear picture. Older than Rod, with gray hair and a police uniform. The realization that a law enforcement officer had not only participated in, but apparently orchestrated the assault against his daughter elevated this beyond personal revenge into something approaching a military operation against enemy combatants. Raphael's intelligence report, delivered via encrypted message at 2,300 hours, confirmed Dwayne's worst suspicions and provided information that transformed his tactical approach. Rod Manning wasn't just a local predator protected by family connections. He was part of a systematic operation involving multiple law enforcement officials and evidence of other victims. The report detailed a network of corruption centered around Police Chief Tim Lewis, Rod's uncle, who had been covering up his nephew's crimes for years. But more disturbing were financial records showing payments from multiple sources to various Manning family members, suggesting they were being compensated for services that went far beyond normal police work. Most damning were the digital forensics that Raphael had uncovered. Rod Manning's social media accounts contained coded references to teaching lessons to children whose parents had crossed certain people in town. The assault on Emma wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of using violence against children to intimidate and control their parents. But Raphael's report also provided the key to Dwayne's operational plan. Rod Manning's confidence in his immunity had made him sloppy with operational security. His communications were unencrypted, his daily routine was predictable, and his isolation on the family property outside town made him vulnerable to the kind of operation Dwayne was planning. The most useful intelligence concerned Rod's schedule. Every Thursday night, he met with his uncle and cousin at the family property to coordinate their activities for the following week. These meetings typically lasted several hours and involved alcohol consumption that would impair their judgment and reaction times. Thursday was 2 days away, enough time to finalize preparations, but not so long that circumstances might change. Dwayne began his final operational planning with a methodical approach that had kept him alive through 2 combat deployments. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. Rather than simply eliminating Rod Manning, Dwayne would dismantle the entire network that had protected him. The evidence Raphael had gathered would be delivered to federal authorities, but only after the immediate threat to Emma had been permanently neutralized. Wednesday evening, as Emma slept peacefully in her new first-floor bedroom, Dwayne made his final preparations. The equipment Keith had provided was familiar: night vision devices, communications gear, and weapons that couldn't be traced back to military inventory. The farm implements he'd purchased would serve their purpose and then be disposed of in ways that left no forensic evidence. His phone buzzed with a text from Bonnie. "Need to see Emma. Have lawyers. This isn't over." Dwayne deleted the message without responding. Bonnie had chosen her side when she'd prioritized her affair over Emma's safety. Whatever legal threats she might pursue would be irrelevant after Thursday night, when the entire Manning network ceased to exist. At 0200 hours, Dwayne conducted his final reconnaissance of the Manning property, confirming access routes and establishing contingency plans. The trailer where Rod lived sat in a clearing surrounded by dense woods, with only one road in or out. It was the perfect location for what military planners called a kill box, an area where targets could be engaged without possibility of escape. As dawn approached, Dwayne returned home to find Emma awake and troubled by another nightmare. He held her until she fell back asleep, her small body trembling with residual fear that reinforced his certainty about what needed to be done. "It's almost over, baby girl," he whispered as she settled back into peaceful sleep. "Daddy's going to fix everything tomorrow night." The promise wasn't just about Rod Manning anymore. It was about dismantling a system of corruption that used violence against children to maintain power, about ensuring that Emma and other potential victims would never again face threats that the legal system couldn't handle. Rod Manning and his accomplices had declared war on innocent children, confident that their badges and family connections made them untouchable. They were about to learn what happened when their war finally encountered a soldier trained to fight enemies who hid behind positions of authority and operated outside the rules of civilized society. Tomorrow night, their war would end. Chapter 6. The calm before. Thursday dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crystalline air that made long-distance shooting easier and sounds carry farther than normal. Dwayne had been awake since 0400, conducting final equipment checks and reviewing his operational timeline. By 1800 hours, he would be in position. By 2100 hours, it would be over. Emma was having a good day, her physical recovery progressing better than expected. They spent the morning working on her homework, math problems that reminded Dwayne of simpler times when the most complex calculations in his life involved helping his daughter with fractions rather than computing ballistic trajectories and timing sequences. "Daddy, you seem different today," Emma observed with a perceptiveness that often surprised him. "Are you worried about something?" "Just making sure everything's going to be okay for us," he replied honestly. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love. She nodded with the acceptance of a child who trusted her father completely, but Dwayne could see the lingering shadows in her eyes, the hypervigilance that had developed since Rod Manning's assault. Every unexpected sound made her tense. Every stranger's approach caused her to move closer to Dwayne's protective presence. The psychological damage would take years to heal, but tonight would begin the healing process by eliminating the source of her fear. At 1400 hours, Dwayne received a coded message from Raphael, package delivered to federal contacts. They're very interested in the contents. Timing is yours to control. The federal investigation would proceed regardless of tonight's outcome, but Dwayne's operational plan ensured that Rod Manning and his accomplices wouldn't be free to hurt other children while bureaucratic processes slowly ground toward justice. His final preparation was a video message for Emma, recorded on his laptop and saved to an encrypted drive that Keith would deliver if the operation went wrong. In it, he explained his love for her, his pride in her strength and intelligence, and his confidence that she would grow up to be an extraordinary woman regardless of tonight's outcome. Sometimes, sweetheart, the people who are supposed to protect children fail to do their job. When that happens, it becomes the responsibility of people like Daddy to make sure that children are safe. I want you to know that everything I'm doing is because I love you more than anything in the world. At 1700 hours, Mrs. Peterson arrived to stay with Emma, bringing homemade cookies and a warm smile that helped mask Dwayne's departure. He'd explained that he had military business to handle and might be gone overnight. Explanation that Emma accepted without question. "Be good for Mrs. Peterson," he told Emma, kissing her forehead with the tenderness of a father who understood this might be their last normal moment together. "I'll see you in the morning. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby girl. More than all the stars in the sky." The drive to the Manning property took 30 minutes through back roads that Dwayne had scouted repeatedly over the past 2 days. His equipment was secured in a hunting bag that would attract no attention if anyone saw him in the area. To any observer, he would appear to be simply another veteran enjoying some time in the woods. At 1800 hours, Dwayne was in position, a concealed observation post approximately 400 meters from Rod Manning's trailer, with clear sight lines to all approaches and multiple escape routes if the situation developed unexpectedly. The waiting began. At 1915, Rod Manning's black pickup truck pulled into the clearing, followed by 2 other vehicles. Through his scope, Dwayne could identify Tim Lewis, the police chief, and another man who matched the description of the district attorney cousin. All 3 men appeared relaxed, confident in their security and immunity from consequences. For 2 hours, Dwayne observed their movements, confirming their routine and noting the casual way they discussed business that included references to teaching lessons and keeping people in line. Their arrogance was absolute, their confidence in their untouchable status complete. At 2130 hours, as the 3 men began what appeared to be their weekly coordination meeting on the trailer's front porch, Dwayne's secure communication device buzzed with a message from Keith. "Emma's safe. Mrs. Peterson reports all quiet. You have a clean operational environment. The confirmation that Emma was secure removed the last constraint on Dwayne's operational planning. From this point forward, his focus could be entirely on the mission without concern for collateral consequences. At 2,145 hours, Dwayne began his final approach. The skills he'd learned in 2 combat deployments, moving silently through hostile territory, identifying and neutralizing threats before they could respond, operating independently in environments where failure meant death, all came together in a systematic advance through the darkness surrounding Rod Manning's property. By 2,200 hours, he was in position to execute the operation that would end Rod Manning's threat to Emma and other children permanently. The 3 men continued their meeting, unaware that their conversation about future lessons for uncooperative families would be their last. Dwayne's finger found the trigger of his rifle as he settled into a firing position that provided clear shots at all 3 targets. The scope's crosshairs centered on Rod Manning's chest as the man who'd tortured Emma continued to laugh about the assault with his accomplices. In combat, there was always a moment of absolute clarity before engagement, a crystalline instant when all factors aligned and the outcome became inevitable. As Dwayne steadied his breathing and began the trigger pull sequence that would begin Rod Manning's elimination, that moment of clarity arrived. This wasn't just about revenge or justice in any traditional sense. This was about warfare conducted by different rules, where the enemy had declared children to be legitimate targets, and where conventional authorities had proven themselves to be collaborators rather than protectors. Rod Manning had chosen to make war on innocent children, confident that his badge-carrying uncle and prosecutor cousin would shield him from consequences. He was about to learn that some wars attract enemies who fight by rules that badges and political connections can't influence. At 2,203 hours, Dwayne Reese began the systematic elimination of the Manning network, starting with the man who'd put his hands on Emma and ending with a message that would resonate throughout any other predators who might be considering children as acceptable targets. The war Rod Manning had started by assaulting an 8-year-old girl was finally encountering an enemy trained to finish what others had started. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. At 2,203 hours, Dwayne's first shot shattered the quiet October night and Rod Manning's chest simultaneously. The .308 round struck center mass, dropping the man who'd tortured Emma before he could process what was happening. The beer bottle fell from Rod's hand as he collapsed backward off the porch, his face frozen in the arrogant expression he'd worn while discussing future assaults on children. Tim Lewis, the police chief, reached for his service weapon with the trained reflexes of a law enforcement veteran, but Dwayne's second shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying into the darkness. The third shot, fired before Lewis hit the ground, ensured he would never again use his badge to protect predators who hurt children. The district attorney cousin, Paul Metcalf, attempted to run toward his vehicle, but made it only a few steps before Dwayne's fourth shot brought him down. Unlike his more experienced companions, Metcalf had never faced genuine combat, and his panic made him an easy target for someone with Dwayne's training. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 lives ended with the surgical precision of a soldier who understood that some enemies deserved no opportunity for surrender or negotiation. Rod Manning and his accomplices had declared war on children. Now they faced the consequences of that declaration. But Dwayne's operation was far from complete. Moving swiftly through the darkness, he approached the trailer where the 3 men had been meeting. Inside, he found exactly what Raphael's intelligence had suggested: comprehensive documentation of their criminal network, including photographs and videos that prove their systematic abuse of children throughout Millbrook. The evidence was more extensive than even Dwayne had anticipated. Rod Manning's laptop contained hundreds of images documenting assaults on children dating back 5 years, many featuring recognizable local families who'd apparently been targeted for intimidation purposes. The financial records showed payments totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars from various sources, money that had purchased the silence of victims and the cooperation of corrupt officials. Most damning was a recording device that had captured tonight's conversation, including explicit discussions of plans to assault other children whose parents had become problematic for certain business interests in town. Emma's assault hadn't been an isolated incident of relationship drama gone wrong. It had been part of a systematic campaign of terror designed to control the local population through threats against their children. Dwayne spent 45 minutes copying files and organizing evidence that would ensure federal investigators could dismantle the entire network of corruption that had protected the Manning family. When he was finished, Rod Manning's operation would be completely exposed, with documentation sufficient to prosecute anyone who had participated in or benefited from their crimes. At 2,315 hours, Dwayne began the final phase of his operation: disposal of evidence and establishment of an alibi timeline that would protect his ability to continue caring for Emma. The weapons were field-stripped and disposed of in separate locations, with components scattered across multiple counties in ways that would make forensic reconstruction impossible. His clothing and equipment were burned in a fire that would leave no DNA or trace evidence. By dawn, there would be no physical evidence connecting him to the Manning property. The story he would tell was simple and verifiable. Concerned about Emma's recovery, he'd spent the evening at the hospital consulting with medical staff about her long-term treatment options. The hospital security cameras would show his vehicle in the parking lot, and several nurses would remember their conversations about pediatric trauma recovery. It was the kind of alibi that relied on people's natural tendency to remember helpful, concerned fathers rather than suspicious activities, and it would withstand any reasonable investigation. By 0200 hours, Dwayne was back home, where Mrs. Peterson reported that Emma had slept peacefully through the night without nightmares for the first time since her assault. His daughter's improved rest felt like confirmation that removing the threat had already begun the healing process she desperately needed. At 0630 hours, the first news reports began broadcasting details of the tragic shooting at the Manning property, where 3 prominent local officials had been found dead under circumstances that investigators described as suspicious but unclear. The media coverage focused on the loss of dedicated public servants, while omitting any reference to the criminal evidence that federal agents were simultaneously removing from the scene. By 0800 hours, federal investigators had taken control of the crime scene and begun processing the extensive documentation that would lead to arrests throughout Millbrook's power structure. The evidence Dwayne had organized for them painted a picture of corruption so comprehensive that it would require months to fully investigate and prosecute. Emma woke that morning with the first genuine smile Dwayne had seen since her assault. She couldn't have known about the previous night's events, but children often sense when threats have been eliminated even if they can't articulate how they know. "I had good dreams last night, Daddy," she said as they shared breakfast. "I dreamed we were safe and happy, and the scary things couldn't find us anymore." "That's because we are safe, sweetheart," Dwayne replied, knowing that for the first time since her assault, his words were completely true. The people who hurt you can't hurt anyone anymore. The next several days brought a parade of federal investigators, media attention, and community meetings as the scope of the Manning Network's crimes became public knowledge. Families throughout Millbrook came forward with stories of intimidation, abuse, and corruption that had been covered up for years. Bonnie attempted to return home during the chaos, claiming concern for Emma's welfare, but Dwayne's lawyer, recommended by Keith, had already filed paperwork documenting her role in endangering their daughter. Her parental rights were suspended pending investigation into her relationship with Rod Manning and knowledge of his criminal activities. "You think you're so smart," Bonnie accused during their final conversation. "You think you can just destroy people's lives because you didn't get what you wanted. I protected our daughter from people who were systematically abusing children," Dwayne replied calmly. "If you can't understand the difference, that explains everything I need to know about who you really are." Emma's recovery accelerated dramatically once the threat was eliminated. Her nightmares stopped, her natural confidence began returning, and she started asking about returning to school and soccer practice. The psychological healing would take time, but the foundation for that healing, her sense of safety and security, had been restored. 3 weeks after the Manning Network's elimination, Emma and Dwayne were playing chess in their living room when she looked up from the board with the serious expression she wore when processing important thoughts. "Daddy, the bad men who hurt me. They're not coming back, are they?" "No, sweetheart. They're never coming back. They can't hurt you or any other children ever again." She nodded with the acceptance of a child who trusted her father's promises completely. "Good. I was worried about other kids like me." The comment revealed the depth of Emma's character. Even while recovering from her own trauma, she was concerned about other potential victims. It confirmed everything Dwayne had believed about his daughter's essential goodness and reinforced his certainty that eliminating Rod Manning and his network had been not just justified, but necessary. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her room, she'd moved back upstairs once her ribs healed. Dwayne stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood where his daughter could now grow up safely. Rod Manning had declared war on children, confident that corruption and family connections would protect him from consequences. He learned too late that some wars attract enemies who understand that protecting innocence sometimes requires methods that exist outside legal frameworks and social conventions. The man who'd celebrated torturing an 8-year-old girl had never seen another sunrise. His network of accomplices had been dismantled, his victims had been freed from fear, and his threat to other children had been permanently eliminated. It was justice delivered by rules that predators understood better than laws they'd learned to manipulate, and it had restored safety to a community where children could once again trust that monsters had consequences. Chapter 8. Justice Served. 6 months after the Manning Network's elimination, Millbrook had transformed into a different town entirely. The federal investigation had exposed corruption reaching into every level of local government, resulting in arrests, resignations, and a complete reorganization of law enforcement leadership. What had once been a community living under the shadow of systematic intimidation had become a place where families felt genuinely safe. Dwayne received regular updates on the investigation's progress from federal agents who treated him as a concerned citizen rather than a suspect. The evidence found at Rod Manning's property had proven so comprehensive that investigators were still uncovering new victims and criminal connections months later. The scope of the network's activities had shocked even experienced federal prosecutors who specialized in organized crime. This was systematic terrorism targeting families through their children, Agent Sharon Gates explained during one of their conversations. "We've identified at least 47 families who were intimidated, threatened, or assaulted by this network over the past 8 years. Your daughter's case was just one of many, though her courage in speaking about it helped us understand the full scope of their operations." Emma's recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. She'd returned to school with enthusiasm, rejoined her soccer team, and developed new friendships with children whose families had also been freed from the Manning Network's threats. Her natural resilience, combined with excellent counseling and the restoration of her sense of safety, had allowed her to heal in ways that impressed her medical team. But it was her conversation with Dr. Kim during a routine follow-up appointment that revealed the depth of her recovery and the strength of character that would define her future. "Emma," Dr. Kim asked gently, "do you still have scary dreams about what happened to you?" "Sometimes," she replied honestly, "but they're different now. In my dreams, I'm not scared anymore because I know the bad people can't hurt me. And sometimes I dream about helping other kids who are scared because I know what it feels like and I know it gets better." The comment moved Dr. Kim to tears and confirmed what Dwayne had always known about his daughter. She possessed an inner strength that would allow her to not just survive trauma, but to transform it into a source of empathy and purpose that would benefit others. That evening, as they worked on Emma's science project about constellations, she asked the question that Dwayne had been expecting for months. "Daddy, what really happened to the men who hurt me?" Dwayne set down the star chart they'd been studying and looked directly into his daughter's eyes. At 9 years old, she deserved honesty appropriate to her age and understanding. "They made choices that hurt innocent people, especially children," he explained carefully. "When people choose to hurt children, sometimes other people have to make hard choices to stop them. What's important is that they can never hurt you or any other children again." Emma nodded with the gravity of a child who understood that adult decisions often involve complexities beyond her current comprehension. Did you make hard choices to protect me? Yes, Dwayne replied simply. Every day, I make choices designed to protect you and make sure you're safe and happy. That's what fathers do. Good, Emma said with a matter-of-fact acceptance that characterized her approach to difficult topics. I'm glad you're my daddy and that you know how to keep bad people from hurting kids. The conversation represented a milestone in Emma's healing. She could discuss her assault without trauma responses, understand that justice had been served without needing detailed explanations, and trust that her father would always prioritize her safety above all other considerations. As spring arrived in Millbrook, Dwayne received an unexpected visitor. Janice Law, the ER nurse who provided him with crucial information the night Emma was assaulted. She came to their house on a Saturday afternoon, carrying flowers for Emma and an expression that mixed gratitude with something approaching awe. I wanted to thank you, she said as they sat on the front porch while Emma played in the backyard. I've been a nurse for 25 years, and I've seen too many children hurt by predators who never face consequences. What happened to the Manning Network? It's given hope to families who'd lost faith in justice. The federal investigation did that, Dwayne replied carefully. Sometimes the system works, even if it takes time. Janice smiled with a knowing expression of someone who understood subtext. Sometimes the system needs help from people who understand that protecting children is more important than following rules that don't work. I don't know exactly what happened that night, and I don't need to know. What matters is that Rod Manning and his friends can never hurt another child. She paused, watching Emma demonstrate her soccer skills with the enthusiasm of a completely healthy, secure child. I have 3 grandchildren now, and they're growing up in a world where predators like Rod Manning know there are consequences for hurting kids. That's worth more than any amount of legal procedure. As Janice prepared to leave, she handed Dwayne a small card with her personal contact information. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. People like you are the reason children like Emma can grow up safe. That evening, as Dwayne tucked Emma into bed, she asked about their visitor and why the nurse had seemed so emotional. She's someone who cares about children and helps make sure they're okay when they're hurt, Dwayne explained. She wanted to thank us for being brave and helping other families feel safer. That's nice, Emma said sleepily. I like helping people feel safer. Maybe when I grow up, I can help protect kids too. I think you'll be excellent at protecting people, Dwayne replied, kissing her forehead. You're already one of the bravest people I know. As he turned off her bedroom light, Dwayne reflected on the transformation that had occurred in all their lives. Emma was thriving academically and socially, her natural confidence restored, and her sense of security absolute. The community around them had been freed from a network of predators who'd operated with impunity for years. Other children were safe from threats that the legal system had proven incapable of addressing. The methods he'd used that October night existed outside legal frameworks and social conventions, but the results spoke for themselves. Rod Manning and his accomplices had declared war on innocent children, confident that corruption and family connections would protect them from consequences. They'd learned too late that some wars attract enemies who understand that protecting innocence sometimes requires operating by rules that predators understand better than laws they'd learned to manipulate. The cost had been 3 lives that had forfeited any claim to mercy by their systematic abuse of children. The benefit had been the safety and security of an entire community, the healing of dozens of victim families, and the knowledge that other predators would think twice before targeting children in a town where consequences could be swift, final, and delivered by people who prioritize protection over procedure. As Dwayne settled into his own bed, listening to the quiet sounds of his daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, he felt the deep satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Emma was safe, justice had been served, and their future together was secure. Rod Manning had made the fatal error of believing that hurting a soldier's child would go unanswered. He learned too late that some fathers are also warriors, and that warriors who fight to protect their children operate by rules that badges and political connections can't influence. The war Rod Manning had started was over, and the right side had won. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 1 year after the elimination of the Manning Network, Millbrook celebrated its first annual Children's Safety Festival, a community event that had emerged organically from families who wanted to commemorate their freedom from fear. The festival featured educational booths about child protection, demonstrations by new law enforcement leadership, and activities designed to help children understand their rights and recognize trusted adults. Emma had been asked to cut the ribbon at the festival's opening ceremony, an honor that reflected her role as both a survivor and a symbol of the community's transformation. At 10 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of a child who understood her own strength and the security that came from knowing she was protected by people who would never let her be hurt again. This festival is for all the kids who were scared before and all the kids who will never have to be scared now, Emma said into the microphone with the poise that had impressed everyone who met her. It's to remember that grown-ups are supposed to protect children, and when good grown-ups do their jobs right, kids can just be kids. The crowd's standing ovation lasted several minutes, but Dwayne noticed that many adults were wiping away tears as they applauded. Emma's words had captured something essential about what Millbrook had lost and found again: the fundamental expectation that children should be safe in their own community. After the ceremony, Dwayne was approached by Agent Sharon Gates, who had become something of a family friend during the ongoing federal investigation. The prosecution of the Manning Network's surviving members and collaborators was proceeding smoothly, with convictions already secured against 12 individuals who had participated in or benefited from their crimes. The final sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month, Agent Gates reported. The surviving conspirators are looking at federal prison terms ranging from 15 to 30 years. None of them will ever be in a position to hurt children again. Good, Dwayne replied simply. Emma deserves to know that justice was comprehensive and permanent. Agent Gates nodded, then lowered her voice slightly. I wanted you to know that this investigation has become a model for how we approach systematic child abuse cases. The evidence preservation and organization at the crime scene was so thorough that it's being used as a training example for our forensics teams. The comment was as close as the federal agent could come to acknowledging what she suspected about Dwayne's role in the Manning Network's elimination, but it also confirmed that his operational planning had achieved its intended result: complete documentation of the criminal network and irrefutable evidence for prosecution. That evening, as the festival wound down, Dwayne and Emma walked home through streets filled with families who were laughing and relaxed in ways that had been impossible during the Manning Network's reign of terror. Children played outside without hypervigilant parents. Teenagers gathered at the park without fear of intimidation, and the entire community carried itself with the confidence that came from knowing predators faced real consequences. "Daddy," Emma said as they reached their front porch, "Mrs. Wilson told me that her daughter Sarah used to have nightmares about bad men, but now she sleeps fine. She said it's because of what happened to the Manning people." Sarah Wilson was one of the children who had been identified as a victim of the Manning Network's intimidation campaigns. Her family had been afraid to speak about their experiences until after Rod Manning's elimination, when they'd finally felt safe enough to cooperate with federal investigators. "I'm glad Sarah feels safer now," Dwayne replied. "All children deserve to sleep without nightmares." "I know," Emma said with the seriousness that characterized her approach to discussions about child protection. "That's why I want to be someone who helps keep kids safe when I grow up. Maybe a police officer or a federal agent like Agent Gates." The comment filled Dwayne with pride and confirmed something he'd hoped for throughout Emma's recovery. Rather than being broken by her trauma, she'd been strengthened by it and motivated to help others. Her experience with victimization had created empathy and purpose that would benefit other children throughout her life. As they settled into their evening routine, homework, dinner, and their traditional chess game, Dwayne reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The man who'd tortured his daughter was dead. The network that had protected him was dismantled, and the community around them had been transformed from a place of fear into a place of genuine safety. But more importantly, Emma had not just survived her assault, she'd transcended it. She was thriving academically, socially, and emotionally in ways that prove her fundamental resilience and the effectiveness of removing the threat that had traumatized her. "Daddy," Emma said during their chess game, "do you think the bad people who hurt children know that there are people like you who will stop them?" Dwayne considered his response carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved age-appropriate explanations that wouldn't burden her with adult complexities. "I think some of them are learning," he replied. "And I think when bad people realize that hurting children brings serious consequences, they're less likely to hurt children." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction as she moved her knight into position for what would become checkmate in 3 moves. Kids should be able to just be kids without worrying about bad grown-ups. The chess game ended with Emma's victory. Her strategic thinking had improved dramatically over the past year, reflecting cognitive development that might have been stunted if her trauma hadn't been resolved so completely. Her ability to plan multiple moves ahead and anticipate her opponent's responses suggested intellectual growth that had been freed by the restoration of her sense of security. As Dwayne tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked the question that had become part of their nightly routine since her recovery. "Will you always keep me safe, Daddy?" "Always," he replied with the absolute certainty of a father who had proven that promise under the most extreme circumstances. "No matter what happens, no matter who tries to hurt you, I will always make sure you're safe." "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars in the sky." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Dwayne stood at her bedroom window looking out at the quiet neighborhood where children could now grow up without fear. The transformation had required methods that existed outside legal frameworks and social conventions, but the results justified every decision he'd made that October night. Rod Manning and his network had declared war on innocent children, confident that corruption and political connections would protect them from consequences. They'd underestimated the determination of a father who understood that some enemies can only be defeated by warriors willing to operate by rules that predators understand better than laws they'd learned to manipulate. The war they'd started was over. Justice had been served. Emma was safe, the community was healed, and other children were protected by the knowledge that those who hurt innocents face swift and final consequences. In the quiet darkness of his daughter's room, listening to her peaceful breathing, Dwayne felt the deep satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. He'd made a promise the night Rod Manning hurt Emma, and that promise had been kept completely. The man who'd celebrated torturing an 8-year-old girl had never seen another sunrise. His network of accomplices had been dismantled. His victims had been freed from fear, and his threat to other children had been permanently eliminated. Some promises, Dwayne reflected as he settled into his own bed, were worth any cost to keep. Protecting Emma had required him to become someone she would never fully understand, but it had also ensured that she could grow up to become someone extraordinary in a world where she would always be safe. Rod Manning's final mistake had been believing that hurting a soldier's daughter would go unanswered. He'd learned too late that some fathers are also warriors, and that warriors who fight to protect their children operate by rules that no badge or political connection can influence. The last promise had been kept. Justice was served. Emma was safe. And that was all that mattered.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.